Do you ever feel like you spent most of your growing up years living in the shadow of somebody else? Well, that was pretty much my story. I think most of you probably know my older brother, Simon, or you may know him as Peter. You probably know some of the things he said and did, largely through the New Testament story. And that's fine, but I think I can safely say that you had never heard of my brother Simon, Peter, if it had not been for me, his brother Andrew. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so let me give you some history. Simon and I grew up as sons of a commercial fisherman, who along with his friend Zebedee and his boys James and John, fished with us. Our fathers took us to the synagogue regularly. We were taught all of the scriptures, we knew all of the old prophets, and were also taught of their prophecies of the Messiah who was yet to come. And this was something we would pray for regularly, but we never imagined that we would see the day that he came. After a few years passed from our early childhood, we became disciples, but of John the Baptist. Now, you may think you have heard some fire and brimstone teaching here in your day, but believe me, it was nothing compared to John the Baptist. He told it like it was, and then more. John was a larger-than-life kind of fellow, but despite that, what always amazed me was he had some very simple teachings. One that I always tried to live up to was he, the Messiah, must increase, and I, or we, must decrease. And this was a challenge to live up to through most of my life, but I certainly did try. One of the more profound moments that I remember with John the Baptist, though, was one of our last with him specifically. I was together with my friend James and John, and he pointed to the man who we now know as Jesus and said, "Behold, the Lamb of God." At that moment, it was as if he was telling us that he was the Messiah and that we should follow him. We had been disciples of John the Baptist for a long time, and you might think that it would be hard for him to let go of his followers. But it was as if he really wanted us to follow Jesus, as if he knew that his purpose was simply to lay the path for the coming Messiah. So John and I did follow Jesus that day. We left and went immediately behind him. And partway through the day, Jesus saw that we were there. And he turned and asked us, "What do you want?" What do we want? A simple question, but it was huge in its scope, and our lack of understanding only added to that. What he was really asking was, what do you expect? Because there had been so many prophecies of the Messiah, what he would look like, how he would reign, what the world would be like because of him. He was wondering what we expected of him. We did not know how to answer, so we simply asked another question: "Where are you staying?" His answer: "Come and see. Come and see." We had no idea what we would come and see as things unfolded from there forward. We had no way of knowing the magnitude of Jesus' presence. But from there, I went right home, back to my brother Simon, and said, "Simon, I have met the Messiah." Well, Simon was immediately excited and could not wait to come meet him as well. So as soon as we could, we took off and found Jesus again. As soon as Jesus and Simon looked into each other's eyes, it was as if long-lost brothers had met and been reunited. The first thing Jesus did was rename my brother Simon to Cephas, or Peter, which means rock. Rock. This is the Simon I grew up with. The Simon that would fly off the handle at a moment's notice. The Simon that would be all hot and bothered about something one day and then drop it and be on to something else the next. Simon, Peter, a rock. It was clear that Jesus saw something more in Peter than I ever did as his brother. From there, you may think that we took off right with Jesus, but we didn't. We still had lives and responsibilities with our families. Jesus continued to gather other disciples, but we spent a lot of our time still back at home fishing with our Father. Until one day when Jesus came by the Sea of Galilee, where we had been working, and approached us. It was at the end of the day. We were putting our nets away. But he reached out and he said, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." That was all it took. Much to the chagrin of our fathers, we dropped our nets right there and took off after Jesus. You probably have all sorts of stories that you remember specifically about Jesus, favorite teachings of his, favorite miracles. But you'd probably be hard-pressed also to say which ones involved me, Andrew, specifically. And my brother Peter, as you know, was very much in the forefront of things, but I like to be in the background, visiting with people, introducing people. In fact, if there were a single trait I had, I'd say it was that, being an introducer. As you recall, one of the first things I did when I met Jesus was go home and get my brother Simon, Peter, and bring him to Jesus. But I'd like to tell you a couple stories that illustrate my relationship specifically. One of them was when we were traveling and we had stopped at a Jewish festival. One of our brethren disciples, Philip, came to me and said, "Andrew, I came across a group of Greek gentlemen who would like to visit with Jesus. What should we do?" I said, "What should we do? Let's introduce them." So we took them over, and they met Jesus and had a great visit. Things went very well. But after it was over, I took off with Philip and said, "Philip, why was that so hard to do?" And that's something I've never been able to understand. Why is it so hard for people to introduce their friends to Jesus? The other disciples actually jokingly called me Andrew the Introducer, but I didn't mind, and Jesus didn't either. He loved to meet people and to tell his story and teach his message. One of the best examples of this was when Jesus was preaching on the hillside one day. Thousands of people had gathered to hear him teach, and they were not disappointed. But the day went on and on and on. People were getting restless and hungry. We begged Jesus to stop and let the people go home before it got dark. But he said to us, "If they're hungry, feed them." Feed them? What were we supposed to do? But I got to thinking, earlier that day, I'd been doing what I usually did, mingling in the background, visiting with people, and I came across a young boy, one of the few who was actually prepared for the day, and he had 2 hard rolls and some fish. So I told Jesus, "This is all I know about. There's a young kid who's got a couple of hard rolls and some fish." Jesus said, "Bring the boy to me." So I did. Jesus blessed the food, and unless you had been there, you would find it so hard to believe. But after he blessed the food, he asked us to help serve. We served over 5,000 people that day from 2 hard rolls and some fish. But that's what life was like with Jesus. Constantly. Different, but yet every day was its own amazing adventure. It may be a miracle, or a tender moment, or a great teaching moment, but every day was magnificent. Despite that, Jesus tried to prepare us for what was to come. But we just assumed that the world would see what we knew, that Jesus was the Messiah, that soon he would exert his power and everybody would know. But that's not how it went. We were not able to at all adequately estimate the animosity of the Jewish leaders towards Jesus. As we looked at the cross and watched him die, it was as if our very reason for living was dying also. We were hollow. It wasn't until a little later that we would understand that that cross was not Jesus' death. That cross was Jesus' throne. And it was because of that cross that Jesus would be able to minister forever. It was because of that cross that not even death could stop Jesus. It was a couple days later that we were approached by the women who told us that Jesus had risen from the tomb. We couldn't believe it. But soon we saw and we heard him, and some of us touched him. But after Pentecost, we Christians were persecuted and scattered throughout the world as we knew it. Most of us disciples actually ended up dying for Jesus. I was crucified as well, but on an X-shaped cross. You may know it as St. Andrew's cross, but I count it a privilege to do so. But right up to the day of my crucifixion, I did what I had done from the first day I met Jesus. I introduced people to Jesus. My single prayer for you is that you will do the same, that you will introduce the people in your lives to Jesus.